Welcome back. We've got a fantastic show for you. Now, this is a show that Julie and I do usually maybe once or twice a year. And what we're doing is we're helping you sift and sort through all the different lead generation sources that are out there. And then we're ranking them. But more than just ranking them, we're telling you what they cost, how long it will take for these lead sources to work, and essentially, frankly, whether, in our opinion, whether you should be doing them or not. So the topic of today's show, actually for the next 5 shows, is the real deal top lead sources ranked from worst to first.
That's right. So part 1, we're going to talk about some of our filters. But first, you have to realize what Tim was talking about. Lead generation is your #1 job in real estate. Without it, nothing else happens. Lead follow-up, pre-qualifying, presenting, negotiating, and closing are your other jobs, but those things can't happen without you generating quality leads first. Now, it's important to accept the fact that there is no one silver bullet, magic, easy button method of lead generation that will create an endless supply of proprietary leads for you. Even though we all want that, it does not exist. If it does exist, you'll hear about it on this podcast, okay? But understand the spokes in the wheel model so you'll have multiple sources of predictable, duplicatable leads. And I want to pause there because you're really good at explaining that the spokes in the wheel, because we're going to refer to that over the next 5 days.
Well, so the gist of it is imagine you're rolling down the street and you have a bicycle and the bicycle wheel has a lot of different spokes on it. Now, why does any wheel have a lot of different spokes on it? Obviously, the more spokes, the stronger the wheel. But your wheel just happens to have only one spoke. So if you can visualize that, you probably just visualizing a one spoke wheel makes you feel a little bit cringy, right? Very unsafe. So you're rolling down the road, you have your one spoke wheel at the front of your bike, and guess what happens? You hit the smallest of pebbles in the road, and then sure enough, that wheel collapses on you. And that's what unfortunately happens, not just in real estate, not just with real estate entrepreneurs like all of you, but also happens in a lot of businesses in general when you only have essentially a vast majority of your leads coming from one source. So what you want ultimately is you want to have spokes on the wheel. You want to have 4 to 6 solid spokes on the wheel that are not interdependent. In other words, you want to have a source of leads that is not dependent on the other sources of leads working. For example, you can't say, well, my buyer agents are a good source of leads. And because my buyer agents can do open houses and my buyer agents can do all these other things. No, buyer agents, if you're using them for lead generation, which you should be, by the way, that would be a source. You can't say, for example, well, open houses is an example. That's a source of leads. So depending on your market, that can be an amazing source of business. Maybe you're buying leads, but what you want to do is you want to try to make your spokes so that if one collapses, the others don't collapse along with it. Because here's the thing that happens in business and life in general. Just because something is working really good now doesn't mean it's going to work really good 6 or 12 months from now. So a lot of you are still trying to do the same thing for lead generation that you have for generations, right? And you're surprised that they're not working as well. The marketing and the branding and the things you were doing in the past just aren't working as well. And a lot of you are making the mistake of assuming that you're the problem. You're not the problem. The market just changed. For example, podcasting, for example. When Julie and I started doing podcasting, and this was well over 10 years ago, there were hardly any podcasts. And people were like, where are you guys putting all this effort into it? Well, we are confident that over time, with having done enough podcasts, they would really work into something. And indeed, that's what's happening. Now, podcasts have become the main source of information that people use. But it's taken, over 10 years and literally over 5,000 podcasts to get there. So you're going to have to, again, this goes back to the spokes you're going to choose on your wheel. You have to decide what you're going to choose based on how fast you frankly need that lead generation source to work. And I'm not going to step on any of your points, don't worry.
Okay.
But also, you're going to have to be patient because some of the biggest lead generation sources take the longest time to work. And we're going to be discussing all of these things with you. So pay attention. Oh, by the way, Julie. Yes. So a lot of you, all of you should want the notes. And I'm going to tell you why you definitely want the notes from today's podcast, because there's a lot of really great notes. And these notes will help you when you're deciding what you want to do when building your lead generation spokes, right? So definitely download all of these notes. They're going to be available at harrisrealestatedaily.com. That's the only place now where all of our notes are. They're not included anymore with YouTube or iTunes, and they just don't give us the room for all of our notes. You guys know we take a lot of time on these notes. So please do download the notes, but you have to subscribe to the newsletter, harrisrealestatedaily.com. Here's all you have to do. Just go to harrisrealestatedaily.com, drop in your email address, and then you have to go to your actual email and confirm that you want the newsletter, and then you're off to the races. It's very simple. It takes 2 seconds to do. Make sure you do that right away.
All right, so in our 5-part podcast series, why 5 parts? Because there's a lot of different lead generation spokes for you to choose from. We're going to rate the different sources of real estate leads based on 6 simple filters and show you the pros and cons of each. So today we're kind of ramping you up so that you know what those 6 filters are, and then for the rest of the week we're going to go from worst to first. We're going to give you the least effective to most effective. But first, let's talk about the filters so that you can make good decisions for yourself. Number 1 is the quality of the lead source. What's the likelihood of the prospect buying or selling with you in the next 60 days or less? Not in the next 6 years, not maybe, possibly if you drip on them long enough, but what is the quality? What's the likelihood of them buying or selling with you? Are they a lead, or are they just an impression or a contact? Do they consider themselves a real estate prospect, or are you the only one thinking of them that way?
But Julie, this is a good place to jump in. There was somebody that was somebody who called us recently, and they wanted us to start advertising on their big platform for our coaching business. And they were obviously trying to sell us into the idea that you'll get this many impressions for this much money, all the rest of it. And I'm guessing that this gal had never listened to our podcast before, and knowing that we'd actually put a lot of thought into the hierarchy that a lot of the impression-based marketing and advertising really truly is. And it is really truly ridiculous wastes of money. And so then when I pointed that out to her, her next plan of attack to try to get our money was, well, you know what? You have to build your brand. What you're really doing is you don't expect to get any business from the impressions. You're just building your brand. You're building name recognition. And then my brain went to, well, what the hell value does that have if people aren't actually going and doing business with us? If it's not becoming a lead that we can hopefully have as a coaching client. And that's how you guys should think about these things as well. Otherwise, what happens is you're going to fall prey to the marketing and advertising bandits. And they are going to tell you all kinds of funny, funky, very scientific
algorithms.
Exactly. Impressions and all these different things. You need this many impressions equal this and equal this.
Yep.
Use your common sense, folks. If you're not going to generate an actual transaction, don't have a high likelihood of generating an actual transaction, and Julie said 60 days, so let's say 60 or 90 days or less, then you probably are being fooled into buying something that's never going to generate a lead. Point number 2, Julie.
Yes, so point number 2 is your return on investment, your ROI. That's your cost versus the results. Now, costs can be in terms of time, money, or both. And again, we're going to rank each lead generation spoke based on all these filters. What do you spend and what do you get? What do you spend in terms of time, in terms of money? How long do you have to wait? How much do you have to spend versus what you actually get? So we're going to rate that as our second filter. Number 3 is duplicatable. Is the lead source duplicatable? In other words, can you predict and control the results? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, and certainly to varying degrees. Number 4 is the time it takes to see your results, the level of commitment and consistency required.
Now go back to point number 3,
Sure.
and that's a really important one, the duplicatable aspect. There's really virtually nothing when it comes to lead generation that's duplicatable other than proactive lead generation.
Sure.
Because if you're buying all your business, and that's what marketing and advertising and straight up lead buying is, you're never in control of what you're actually getting. And we're going to discuss that in great depth on this podcast.
Exactly. I'm glad you hovered there because being able to duplicate and predict is really important. Number 4 was the time it takes to see results, the level of commitment, and the consistency required. Now, sometimes it's going to take more time because it takes more skill, and the results will be a better ROI, but it would take some time for you to build the skill. So we'll talk about that as well. Number 5, I kind of led into that, scripts, skills, and coaching necessary to get the results.
Well, but more specifically, right? What's the level of skill and what's the level of time it's going to take for you to develop that skill for that lead generation source to really work? So for example, if you're going to do a lot of marketing and advertising and you start generating mostly a lot of buyer leads, if you don't have a system to pre-qualify those buyer leads, to really pull out the really great buyer leads from, the ratios I've heard are just like atrocious with regards to bought buyer leads, like 50 to 1, something like that.
Yes.
And we're going to get into the numbers here in a second, hopefully today, if not on tomorrow's show. But the point of it is if you don't have an ability to actually get in front of that buyer, pre-qualify that buyer, get that buyer to actually commit to working exclusively with you, you've just wasted your money and wasted your time on another, marketing, advertising, and buying buyer lead source.
Very well put. That is very true. And there's several of the things that we'll discuss that have that filter on them. So next is number 6. We have 6 filters total. Does the source give you buyer or seller leads? Maybe both. But remember that seller leads are far more valuable than buyer leads. Why? Because there are sellers who have to sell. In other words, keeping the house is not an option for them. But there's really no buyer in the world that exists that has to buy. They can rent, they can stay put, they can live with mom and dad. Maybe they have a perfectly good house. In the case of the upper end, a lot of cases where they've got a perfectly good $2 million house, they don't have to buy a $3 million house. So those are the filters. We can get into some of these lead sources if you'd like,
Well,
but that's up to you.
Let's move on to some of the lead sources. But so to your last point there, which is really important, you all should be putting more preference on listing leads versus buyer leads for the reason that Julie just stated. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, it's just common sense. Would you rather have 20 buyer leads right now, or would you rather have 5 really great motivated seller leads? All of you naturally are going to lean in towards the sellers. Why? Because when you have a great seller lead, it's pretty much a locked-in guaranteed commission check, whereas buyers can always change their mind. To Julie's point, because there's sellers that actually have to sell. The selling of the home is no longer their choice. If they don't sell the house, something bad's going to happen,
Also,
right?
they don't have to qualify to sell. Like the buyer has to qualify. They might want to buy, but maybe they don't have the ability to buy or the ability to buy what they want.
And this is also something that's really a bane of many agents. It causes a lot of frustration. So a lot of you are buying buyer leads. You can't control the quality of the buyer lead. You can't control the flow of the buyer lead. You have no control over it. And then when you get that buyer lead, you can't control whether that buyer is actually going, maybe they show up in your life and they're super motivated, but then this happens or that happens, and the winds go in a different direction, they change their mind, and the next thing you know, you had these 20 buyer leads and it turns out you only have 2 of them that are viable. That's the type of business you're going to have if you're solely dependent on buyer leads, if you're not honing all your best skills towards focusing on sellers. All right, Julie, let's roll into part number 2, because you do have 31. Holy tamale, lady.
We didn't have to stick strictly to where we split these. Okay.
Okay, so let's...
Yeah. We're going, but recognize we're going from worst to first.
So we're going to go to worst sources of leads, and we're going to break these down, and we're going to tell you what the worst source of lead is. This is
and why.
And why. And essentially, we're going to also shine light on why some of the agents out there are getting fooled into believing that it's not the worst source, and we're going to back up our opinions with actual facts and actual numbers. Julie and I aren't just going to say, something without backing it up with facts. And we're going to tell you where we get our facts as well, because we know a lot of you guys use this information when you're doing your own coaching and training of your teams and the other things.
Yes.
So we're backing everything up, we say, with facts. And here we go. Let's go with number 31, worst lead source for essentially the next 10 years, probably even longer, frankly.
Possibly.
Number 31 is distressed property.
Yes. Now, this is currently ineffective simply because there's very little opportunity here. This is called fishing in a lake with no fish. Now, some of you are putting it all into one category, and I think for our purposes, I would say distressed property is notice of defaults, short sales, and REOs. Okay, so foreclosures, distressed property. Now, why would you be fishing in a lake with no fish, in spite of the fact that people try to sell you these lists and these systems to buy into?
And they always, a lot of these, essentially these guys are on, they're all guys, by the way. They're all on YouTube, and they're trying to sell you into the belief that they somehow have cracked the code and have figured out some massive wave of foreclosures are coming because they're trying to sell you an info product. You've got to see it for what it is.
And we're going to talk about that in just a second. Okay, so let's get to the facts. We like to go facting here. Why is there not enough to go after? Foreclosure rate. As of the first half of last year, 0.23% of housing units in the U.S. were in foreclosure. That's approximately 1 in every 434 homes. Now, the pre-foreclosure stage is harder to get data for in some states because not all properties in pre-foreclosure proceed to full foreclosure. Remember that homeowners, because they sell pre-foreclosure lists, right? But remember that homeowners still have options during pre-foreclosure. They still own the house. They can sell it, they can obtain a forbearance or a loan mod, or they could get caught up. Now, state variances, states like Illinois and New Jersey had higher foreclosure rates, but by higher, we mean 0.25, 1 in every 397 homes instead of 1 in every 434. To find out how much foreclosure activity is in your market, you can simply use foreclosure.com. You can use RealtyTrack. It's easy to research on your own. You can also search your MLS using foreclosure or short sale as a search criteria to convince you. Now, there are micro markets in Vegas. I have a client in Phoenix. She's got a little bit of foreclosure happening. So if that's you, then adjust accordingly. But by and large, there's not enough to spend your time and money on. Now, note, sometimes you're going to have a buyer prospect who asks you to find them a foreclosure or look for distressed property. Find out why. Dig deeper. Use the pre-qualification questions. Are they just looking for a deal, or are they looking for a fix and flip? Are they looking for a cheap rental? Define what they mean. Like, why, especially in a market like now, Why would somebody be looking for a
Well,
foreclosure?
let's give them the mini script. So buyers will show up in your life and they'll say, I'm looking for a deal, or I'm looking for this or the other thing. And you say, well, I hear that, folks say that a lot to me when I start working with them is, they're looking for a really good deal. So what does a really good deal mean to you? You've got to ask them. And if they have unrealistic expectations, I'm giving you permission as your coach or your future coach to not work with them, because they're never going to transact with you, because they're never going to find that house for 30% off. It just is going to take you all your time. They're probably not going to be loyal to you. It's not really worth working with a buyer like that. There's so many better quality buyers out there, especially those that also have houses to sell. So keep that in mind.
But that comes from your counseling of them, right? So if somebody says, maybe they just saw some video online or something, or maybe their dad who bought a foreclosure 30 years ago said, maybe you ought to look for a foreclosure. If they say that, you've got to have that conversation. Why are you looking for that? And let's say that you did find something distressed, and the pool is green, and there's no grass anymore, and it needs a front door, and all the utilities are off.
It might not appraise. You might not be able to get financing if you're not paying
Exactly.
cash. But these are all, this whole question, this filtering process is all part of pre-qualifying your buyers.
Yes.
And if you want our buyer pre-qualifying scripts and all of our, essentially our entire real estate system is called Premier Coaching. And we've made it very easy for all of you guys to join Premier Coaching. We know you love this podcast. This continues to be one of the most downloaded podcasts in the history of residential real estate. Literally over 20 million downloads. So we know you love the podcast. We know you'll really adore Premier Coaching. Absolutely perfect time for you to join. We've made joining Premier Coaching for free, and that does include a daily semi-private coaching call with one of our Harris certified coaches. So all you've got to do is go to premiercoaching.com, premiercoaching.com, and just join. And you get all the first level of Premier Coaching, including a lot of the scripts and the buyer pre-qualifying scripts and the real estate treasure map, which is your business plan, the whole thing. It's all waiting for you over on Premier Coaching. So premiercoaching.com, or if you'd like, you can text the word Premier to 47372, and we'll text you back a link to join premiercoaching.com. Do that urgently. This is something that all of you should be doing so that you can take this information that we're giving you on the show and take your business to the next level.
All right, so hovering on the end of the list, the worst lead source, at least currently, overall, using our 6 filters, this lead source ranks lowest because there's just not that much to be had.
She's still talking about distressed properties.
Yes. Now, some companies are going to take your money, promising a huge supply of leads because there's a 100% increase in distressed property. But remember, that means going from 0.25% to 0.5%. In other words, less than half of 1% of the market. Why would you go after that?
But Julie, let's give them the facts around this. So
Yes.
here's the reason why you really know, without even having to think about this too much, that there's not going to be any sort of foreclosure issue anytime soon. It's the amount of equity that people have in their homes. I think I remember all these numbers. I bet you it's somewhere in Julie's notes. But something like half of all the homes in the United States, I believe it's actually 43%,
48%,
are owned without a mortgage. Okay, so of that, of the homes that are owned without a mortgage, if you look at the equity position of the ones with, so let's assume that if you don't have a mortgage, you're not going to lose your house to foreclosure, okay? I mean, obviously you could have a tax issue or something like that, but if half the country owns their home with no mortgage, then you've got no worries about a foreclosure. So
or a short sale. You can't do it.
Exactly. So there's no distress that's happening with half of the homes that are being owned outright. The other half of oh, by the way, just to throw this into the mix, no, there are not, a vast majority of those paid off homes are not owned by big institutions. Julie and I have done these podcasts before. Less than 2% of all the homes in the United States, the single family homes, are owned by owners essentially that own more than 100 units, 100 doors. So just to put it in perspective, when you hear all this politicized BS about BlackRock and all these other companies buying up real estate, they have, but it's less than 2%, so it shouldn't even show up on your radar in a meaningful way. Now, with regards to the 50% with loans, something like and again, I'm averaging, or
Sure.
I'm guessing, but it's close. Of the 50% of all the homes out there that have mortgages, most of those have at least 50% equity in their homes. So you're looking at, and I did remember this, I sent you the article, Julie. It was the amount of mortgage equity versus the amount of mortgage debt. And the amount of mortgage equity, it was measured in the trillions.
Trillions, yes.
Okay, but it was, I believe, the amount of mortgage equity was 50% more than the amount of mortgage debt, which is right in alignment with what we just said.
Huge.
So you cannot have a foreclosure crisis where there's that much money because people won't lose their houses to foreclosure if they have that much equity.
They'll just sell it or refi if they can.
What market in the United States right now could you not price a house, even if it had funky condition and location, if it was priced well? What house in the country, what neighborhood market in the country would that house not sell in 22 seconds? Do you guys get the point? So that's the reason the chasing distressed real estate in this market is an absolute exercise in futility.
That's right. We're still averaging for everything that sold last month, we're still averaging 3 offers for every closed transaction. Part of the issue when there was foreclosures was we had way more inventory than there were buyers to buy it. We don't have anything that looks like that right now. So hopefully we put point number 31 to rest.
And do remember, a lot of you discovered Julie and I back in 2007 and 2008 when we launched the nation's first short sale program teaching agents how to do short sales. And we worked with the major lenders, we worked a little bit with the FDIC, we worked with NAR, teaching agents how to do short sales. So I assure you that if there was any reason to be teaching you guys how to do distressed real estate, we would be the ones teaching you.
Yes, we know of what we speak.
Exactly.
Deeply.
All right. So point number 30, and remember, we're doing these in the reverse order. We'll do maybe 1 or 2 more today. So point number 30, and this is the least effective to most effective. You guys are going to love number 1 when we get there in the next couple podcasts into the future. But you want to listen to all of these. Don't skip any of these days. All right, Julie, number 30 of the least effective way to generate closed transactions, and this will raise the most eyebrows.
Yes, one of your favorites to talk about. Buying buyer leads. Yes, that's right. You knew it was coming. Examples. There are many examples, but the most notable would be, of course, Zillow, Realtor.com, OpCity, Market Leader, Homes.com, sources like that where you're paying for those leads. Using our filters, how do we rate this lead source? Very low, but why? Okay, and I have some bullet points, and I know you're going to want to talk about it too. So buying buyer leads is, number 1, unnecessary due to the abundance of free buyer leads using other methods, which we're going to discuss this week. It's expensive, it's unpredictable, the leads are not yours exclusively, and they're not guaranteed to transact at all with or without you. That's just a few of the reasons we don't like
Let's
that.
put this in perspective.
Sure.
So we have coaching clients and we have friends at EXP in particular that sell hundreds and hundreds of houses per year. All right, so the hundreds and hundreds of houses per year, with the new mic setup, every time you have tea, they can hear you, right?
Sorry.
Yeah. So that weird liquid noise was Julie. Okay. So they will, for example, I have somebody who is, we're friends with several of these top Zillow agents. They're Zillow Flex agents. And they pay, get this listeners, $10,000 a month, whether they have closed transactions or not.
Every month.
Every month for 300 buyer leads. And of course the buyer leads are, I assume they're not just names on pieces of paper. So let's assume they're at least been somewhat vetted. But in addition to that, 40% off the top of the buyer commission goes to Zillow.
That's after the $10,000 per month. That's not included in the $10,000 per month.
Exactly. So you're paying $10,000 a month, and they're sending you 30 leads per month. Now we know, maybe you don't know, that most of those buyer leads really are not very motivated. They're just not very good quality. There's not all the problems that buying buyer leads. And the reason that Zillow most likely went to a model like that and starting to essentially fleece their best users even at a higher level is because, frankly, a lot of those best users did not have a system in place with enough spokes, so they didn't have to be solely dependent on buying buyer leads. And so if you're in that situation, and some of you listening are, where your business is solely dependent on a one lead source like Zillow, you are literally paying the price because they're literally taking advantage of you because they know you don't have multiple sources of lead generation, so they can amp up the fee. Now, why are they charging you $10,000 other than, because they can? It's because they're seeing the number of transactions that they're closing and the referral fees that they're collecting. I'm guessing here, but I'm probably right. It's not on the upward slope, it's on the downward slope. So they know that the buyer leads that they're selling to agents and trying to collect 40% referral fees aren't what they were. And so they're trying to make up lost revenue by charging these mega teams mostly $10,000 a month in addition to the 40%. And you don't have to be signing up for the highest tier, but you're still going to be paying Zillow a flat fee plus a referral fee. Why would you sign yourself up for being an indentured servant of Zillow for the rest of your career when buyer leads are the easiest thing on planet Earth to generate in abundance forever?
Just don't do it. Walk away from point number 30. You want to do one more?
Sure.
Okay, one more. And I put these all together. We could have split these up, but I kind of think of them the same way. You can tell me your opinion. Number 29, billboards, bus benches, grocery cart advertisements, and urinal cakes. And there are other.
You just threw urinal cakes on there to make me laugh.
I did.
Well, because we did see that once.
We did. That's
Yeah.
right. Okay, so billboards, bus benches, grocery cart advertisements. Go ahead.
When I say we, I mean me. You weren't actually
no,
looking.
I wasn't there, but I did hear
I mean, I
about
went to a, you guys have maybe have seen these before. Somebody who sells urinal cakes, you know what I'm talking about, man. Okay, had the great idea. Well, let's put some marketing and advertising on the urinal cakes.
Gross.
And sure enough, I don't even remember what
It was some
state.
restaurant or something.
I think we were in like Montana or something, to be
Yeah.
honest, yeah. And I went to the bathroom, and sure enough, there was some agent looking back at me, smiling as I was,
Doing your business.
doing my business. That's not a good idea.
No, ew.
Now, it is a captive audience. You got to give them that.
That's true. But aside from being gross, why maybe not do billboards, bus benches, grocery cart advertisements? Well, they're expensive.
By the way, I bet that agent with the urinal cake
Yeah.
marketing campaign also had a very complicated drip system.
Oh, it's terrible.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Proof that it's a live podcast. All right. Expensive and ineffective. Now, you also, let's say that you were schnookered into doing something like this. You thought maybe it was a good idea. You have a contract with monthly expenditure required. You can't just try out a grocery cart advertisement for 1 month. There is zero pre-qualification of anyone looking at these types of advertising. And just so you guys know we're not making this up, typical costs, I looked it up, bus bench advertising. Now, if somebody's taking the bus, doesn't have a car, are they really a buyer for a house where the average sale price is $400,000? Maybe, but maybe not.
Well, the bus benches, too, are often, the bunch bus advertising is kind of migrated towards those covered shelters where they put billboards
Yep.
up in all of them.
That's right.
But really, just Julie's
So
3 points here.
$250 per bench per month, okay, to try it out. Billboard advertising, average cost is $850 just for 4 weeks on average, and that's in like a normal area, right? But it varies greatly, and it's much more costly in downtown big cities. Say you wanted to advertise in downtown Miami, it's not going to be $850.
Well, it's tens of thousands of dollars per month.
Yes.
And it's like most of the time when you see those ads, who's the agent we see when we fly into Atlanta? Mark.
I don't kid me.
Exactly,
2
you can't
points.
even remember.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's got probably, as we drive...
Lots of billboards.
Lots of billboards. I'm guessing we see probably 20 or 30 of his billboards, something
Yeah.
like that. It's amazing, honestly. He's spending that much money. But to his credit, some of his billboards have calls to action that
Yes,
are
that's right. Guaranteed sales, stuff like
guaranteed
that.
sell and stuff like that. So he is doing a good job with that. But most of the billboards that you'll see, especially agent advertising, it's sold to agents under the guise of branding.
That's right.
So you're supposed to somehow see a billboard of Tim and Julie Harris with no CTA. We're just sitting there smiling with our dog or whatever, and there's the name of our broker. Usually there's not even a phone number. Sometimes there's a website, and that is something that agents are being sold to believe is actually going to generate transactions. What it does, it gives you the false sense of essentially lead generation because people will say they saw your billboard.
Yeah, and that makes you feel good.
Right. It makes you feel so that's what you're paying for. You're paying to feel famous. You're replacing. There's an old podcast that Julie and I do occasionally. It's the gist of it is if you have to choose between being rich and being famous, and rich is merely where your money works for you, and you no longer work for your money. Every single person listening right now is going to say rich, right? No, like, oh man, I'd choose to be rich any day of the week versus being famous. If you could only choose one, dear listener, what would you choose? And yet, which do you choose? Most of you choose to be famous. You don't judge someone by what they say, you judge them by what they do, if you're going to judge them at all, right? So when agents say, well, I'd rather be rich where my money works for me and I no longer have to work for my money, but how much money are you spending on your urinal cakes and your bus benches and all these these marketing campaigns and advertising and branding? All of your profit is going to being famous. Why are you doing it? You already know that it doesn't generate closed transactions. It might reinforce, it might, I think, constitute, like, for example, if you're calling, let's say, for example, into a particular neighborhood and you're focused on expired listings, or you're just doing different things to make it so that in this particular community, you're really investing yourself, you live there, the whole thing. and then you happen to do a billboard that's outside of that neighborhood, one thing's going to reinforce the other. But if you have to choose one, I'll suggest you choose the one that doesn't cost you anything, because you'll still get the same business without the billboard.
Right, and to your point, that doesn't meet one of our filters to try and be as predictable and duplicatable.
But let's tell them how we know this for a fact.
Sure.
We know this for a fact from doing what we've done for the last 25 years, coaching real estate agents. But back when Julie and I actually sold real estate, we actually had 2 moving trucks. And the biggest one was 25 feet long. And there was this huge mega church that was in Columbus, Ohio, near essentially, 3 ridiculously busy roads. To put a billboard in that particular location, someone would have paid all the money. So the pastor allowed us to put our truck there, and we made donations to him, obviously.
Of course. Yep.
And it was this huge truck, Tim and Julie, the whole thing, buy or sell with me, everything you could possibly imagine. I can tell you for sure, in the years that we had that moving truck, we got a total of 0 closed transactions from it. But people would say they saw the truck, but we had 0 people call because they said they saw the truck. You guys get it?
And that was less expensive than doing the billboard.
And why were, it was over time.
Yeah.
But why were we doing it? Because we too, at one point in our formidable years, were believing that marketing and advertising would generate closed transactions. So we experienced the truth. Then we experienced, obviously, in Technicolor from having coached agents for all these years. And now we're passing this wisdom on to you. So when they call you and they say, hey, Bob, there's a billboard that's open in your community, and this is what it's going to cost, and you feel your ego starting to puff up, and you start to think, oh, I'm going to be famous. You probably will be. People will know who you are, because Julie and I would get recognized from our moving truck, but they wouldn't call us when it came to selling their house because they were calling the agent that they previously worked with or a referral from a trusted friend or advisor. That is the type of thing that we would prefer you learn from listening to us versus your own experience, because guess what? You'll make a lot more money and do a lot more transactions if you don't have to learn on the job. That's the whole point of signing up for coaching, by the way.
That's right. So this one also fails a lot of our filters. It takes too long. Well, really, it takes forever because it doesn't really work at all. It costs you a lot of time. It costs you a lot of money. It's not predictable. It's not duplicatable. Yes, it feeds your ego, but that's not going to, feed your kids, right? So the last but not least, maybe you want to try grocery cart advertising. That has to be cheaper, right? But the average is between $800 and $1,500 per store per month. It looks to me like it should be cheaper than that, but it's not cheaper than that. So there you are. I'll put all those in the same.
I don't know. I didn't read ahead with your notes. I'm now seeing that we are going to talk about like Facebook and all these other types of things. Okay. So really, hopefully you're fine tuning your mind, and I'm going to give you guys some closing thoughts from today's show before we move on to tomorrow. So here's your thought. There's proactive lead generation and there's passive lead generation. And the words basically tell you which one you should be focused on, right?
Yes.
Proactive lead generation means you're having conversations with decision-making adults about buying or selling real estate. Proactive, when you're having a conversation where it's voice to voice, belly to belly, with a decision-making adult about buying or selling real estate, that's what proactive lead generation is. That's where the money has always been made in any kind of business and always will be, especially in this new AI world where everything's going to be leaning in towards doing passive lead generation. So what's passive? Advertising, marketing, direct mail, billboards, moving, all the things.
Pretty much anywhere you're not having a conversation.
Where you're waiting around for them to call you. Where you're being told that the more marketing and advertising you're doing, the more famous you become, the more people will call you. So I want you to, and here's the closing thought. If you have to choose one, choose the proactive, because it's going to put you in a position of control, and it's also going to put you in a position to make a lot more profit. That's really what is absolutely critical that you don't forget. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have a lead source, or lead sources ideally, that are predictable and duplicatable, you will not have consistent cash flow, and you will assuredly go out of business. So do keep these things in mind. Or frankly, you'll have ups and downs and ebbs and flows in your cash flow, which will be very painful. All right, so what's your homework from today? Obviously, get ready for tomorrow's podcast. If you've not yet joined Premier Coaching, just go to premiercoaching.com. Absolutely, positively join Premier Coaching. It will be the exact rocket fuel you need to go to the next level. Go to premiercoaching.com, and here's what I want you to do as soon as you enroll. Download the Real Estate Treasure Map. The Real Estate Treasure Map is your fill-in-the-blank business and life plan. It's waiting for you at premiercoaching.com. It's in the first level, and you do get full access to Premier Coaching for 30 days. So go to premiercoaching.com. In the meantime, we'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.